I try. Okay, it says it's live, but it's not live yet. It's gonna be live soon, I think. Jesse's gonna tell us when we're live. Do, 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 do.
Oh. I just found
Seems like a long time all of a
coffee.
sudden.
That's okay. I've been looking for this.
You looking forward to this, or are you looking for your drink? Is that what you said?
I forgot I had a coffee, and I was like, "Oh, I'm getting tired. I should go make a coffee." I've been at
And there
work
you
since,
had one.
Yeah, I've been at work since noon.
Ooh.
Oh, it's old coffee, but it'll do.
20 seconds. Yeah, okay, I'm with you, Jesse. Do, do, do. It's like finding a $5 bill in your pocket, finding a coffee on your desk.
Even better.
Okay, welcome to 1,000 Ways to be a Champion for Children, Past, Present, and Future. My name is Alan Friesen. The idea with this show is that we increase awareness about adverse childhood experiences. If you're an adult survivor of childhood trauma, we encourage you to readdress, to solve, to go back to those things with a counselor to help you with that, to resolve those situations, and it'll improve your health. It'll make life better for you. And then also we want to end violence for little kiddos that are having experience in that today, and then set the stage for them to be parents who also don't use violence anymore. My guest today is Rachel Walser. I met Rachel very recently. She is a lovely human being, and her and her partner, her work partner, have. I was flabbergasted. A beautiful, elegant solution to make life better for people. Rachel, let's tell us about that. Well, tell us about you first of all, and then tell us about Network of Neighbors.
So my name is Rachel Walser. I am an advocacy coordinator with the YW in Kitchener-Waterloo, and that's a part of the greater YWCA. And together with my work partner, Jen Gordon, we have developed a training called Network of Neighbors, and it is about different ways to respond to domestic violence. And so it's recognizing that while police are often the most common choice, there are other ways to support people living with violence at home.
Yes, beautiful, beautiful system. So do you believe, Rachel, is it possible to end violence? Is that a possible thing, you think?
I think it's possible to change our experiences of violence. In some ways, I think violence has become normalized in our culture, and I think there are ways to come back together as a community so that when violence does happen, healing is more responsive and more community-centric, and it kind of pulls people back into that point where we are together in a system.
Right.
Yeah, I don't think violence is something that just happens. I think that the stage is set for violence, and so how do we deconstruct that? But we can't do it alone. We have to do it together.
I agree entirely. Like the professional folks that are doing this work, and it's really hard work, really challenging work. It's just too big a task. I think we need to get our neighbors involved and just caring people in our community who say, hey, we want to make a difference, right? So
Absolutely.
I think I was in what, session number 10 of your Network of Neighborhood training session?
Was it number 10? We recently hit our milestone. So we're pretty excited about that. We've now trained 100 people in our community. So that was really exciting. And I'm not sure if that was your session there, Alan, or if it was another one.
I think
but it was a big point.
Yeah, I believe you said it was in the 101 that session that I
Yeah.
think I was in your last session. Yes, yes, yeah, and then and it was very very well done, very well explained. I think. Do you do you not think when you start these discussions with the people that have been participating, the 100 people who have participated so far, I'm sure sometimes they express concern that, well, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a police officer, I'm not a, I'm not a professional, I'm not a social services person, like I can't do this. Is that kind of the impression some of them give you?
Absolutely. When we think about the reasons people don't get involved in supporting people experiencing violence, the number one thing is I'm not qualified to do it. And I think when we're thinking about trauma, when we're thinking about harm caused by people, the most important thing is that we need people to help heal that. We need people to be involved in the solution. And so, really, like, what is the qualification to support somebody living with violence? And maybe you don't have the qualification you want, but you're the person who's there. So, how can you be supportive in that moment to not be leaving that person alone? Because ultimately, that must be worse than having someone there who maybe is aware of the fact that they're not the right resource. And so some of what we talk about in the training is how do we connect to those resources? What is our role as allies to people who are living with violence to keep them connected to those resources and to keep them not necessarily like, I mean, we talk about this in the training. There are people who live with violence their entire lives, right? And so how do we stand with those people without going up to someone and telling them that their whole experience is wrong? Like, we want to make sure that all the support we bring is with respect and with dignity and with allyship, like true allyship. And
Yeah,
so
Rachel, what does your shirt say? What is your
it says
what does your
support,
shirt
no
say?
stigma.
Support, not stigma, right?
Yeah,
We want to where people are at, we want to help them where they are as best as we are able, right? That's
yeah,
kind of
absolutely. In our training, we talk a lot about harm reduction. So how do we reduce the harm for someone living with violence? And I think that is I think that's something that people don't think that they would be helpful with in the
right,
moment, right?
right. I don't think this was in your training. And I don't even know if I mentioned this to you. Did I ever mention real talk when we were in our conversations, that this real talk thing?
I don't think so.
They're a group here in Alberta, and it's very good work. I prefer your model. I think your model is more friendly, because the
Okay.
real talk is basically where how you recognize, empathize, act, and listen. So it's the idea is about which the act and listen, kind of the order seems a little goofy there, right? But the idea with that, though, is similar to network of neighbors, that you have enough comfort level that you can offer to be of support to somebody, right? And one thing that they said there, which I think that you will agree with probably, is the first time, if there's a person experiencing violence, the first time they reach out to somebody, 80% of the times it's an informal support, right?
Mhm.
And if that does that resonate with you? Does the 80% make sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm not 100% clear on the statistic. I think the statistics on violence are changing, especially with the pandemic, right?
Yes.
We know that it's ballooned, but I think that first disclosure of an experience of violence is one of the most important ones. If it's not received well, that person learns from that experience and chooses to not share again.
You're way
Um,
ahead of me. This is the big punchline I had for you, Rachel, was that 80% of the time it's an informal support. And if that informal support wasn't accepting and welcome, like not welcoming, but was not, if that person responded in a non-judgmental way and said, Rachel, you're experiencing challenges, I want to help. If that happened, they're going to get help. But if well, what did you do to deserve that? Or like, gee, your partner seems like a nice guy, or whatever. If there was any way that they dismissed that concern that this person is experiencing violence, that person just shuts down and says, that's it, I'm not going looking for help again, right? I'm done.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
that's why we talk about allyship a lot. We go through, like a really thought out, realistic definition of allyship and how to be an ally. And we reflect on the fact that we are constantly learning because there is nobody out there that hasn't made a mistake. But when it comes to this situation, you know, if somebody was to come and say, hey, listen, like this happened to me, I was like, yeah, like really, like that person, being able to go back and be like, listen, I understand that my approach was not fair. You didn't need me challenging you in that moment. And I think the beautiful thing about Network of Neighbors that I really appreciate is that we are encouraging people to continue to build that relationship, right? To not be afraid to make mistakes, to go back, to own your mistakes, be accountable, to listen and like actually listen to that person, and to set their goals ahead of your own in that moment.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So I think that this is a huge way that people in our community, and what's your goal? You're at 100. How many people in your community do you want to have part of your network of neighbors?
Ideally, I'd love to have everybody. We are funded, our grant was for 100 to 150 people. We got extended by a month. We've been featured on CBC recently. We're doing podcasts, things like this. Honestly, though, 150 people in a community our size is not very many people. So hopefully we get 150 people who are willing to share that mentality, that framework, and that toolkit that's coming out, are willing to share that with their neighbors. And so this network just expands.
Yeah.
Because as much as Jen and I love doing these workshops, you know, this isn't the only thing in our community that we really want to dedicate a lot of time to. So the idea is to loop in people and to come together as a community to work together, because violence is a community-wide problem.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Exactly. And violence and poverty, they're very closely linked, right? Was that your experience? That's your understanding?
Yeah, I don't know that I would phrase it that way. It makes it sound, not that I think you're intending to, but I think what happens when you start taking away resources, right? When you start taking away resources, everybody starts to need resources. They needed them before, but now we're having to compete for them. And the mentality that comes from people who are facing oppression, who are marginalized, who don't have adequate resources, is very much, how do I make it to my next paycheck? You know, there isn't a lot there. And so how do we divvy up what's left? And the number of people living in that situation just grows. So smaller resources, more people, how are we going to make this work for everybody? And ultimately, like you and I were talking in our email, you know, violence comes as a result of a lack of other options or lack of other awareness of choices. There's so many, like, I was having this discussion with a colleague today, like at some point people choose to hit women or to abuse their romantic partners or the people they live with. Yes, I agree with that. But I also think the stage is not always set up for those people to be successful in other ways. And so one of the things that you and I were talking about is, how do we help people make different choices? And how do we do that in a way that isn't us coming into their situation saying, hey, listen, like you got to do it differently. No, that's like, yeah, you do got to do it different. I'm not going to ever say it's okay to hit someone. But what I am going to say is, like, what's going on for you there? How can I help you feel supported so that you're able to make different choices? Because this is not an appropriate choice.
Right. So you're speaking specifically now, you're talking about approaching somebody who's using violence in a relationship to say, gee, can I offer you another alternative? Can I help you in any way? Is this who you want to be? Right? Are you like, I got to believe that somebody who's using violence doesn't feel good about using violence. Like, how can they? Right? Like, that's got to be damaging for them. It's very damaging for them as well, I'm sure. Wouldn't it be?
Absolutely. Like when I'm talking about community responses to violence in the home, we're talking about community responses to everybody in that situation, right? And so if we're talking about supporting the woman or the partner who is experiencing the violence, how do we do that, right? But then how also, if somebody has come and they're like, hey, listen, like, you know, I want to talk about this. That is always an opportunity we're going to take, because just like that first disclosure of an experience of violence, someone who is perpetrating violence, chances are they've told people, but maybe they said it in a way just like someone who's experiencing it would have said, is like, oh, my partner is hard on the kids, but you know, they're going to be better kids for it. The same thing happens with, oh, she just makes me so angry, but you know, she didn't do the dishes. Like, there's always that extra justification. And so sometimes in our role as neighbors, we don't get to pick who it is that talks to us, but we do get to try and break down the isolation that keeps that person separate from the rest of the community, pulls them back into the heart of community where we are there for each other, where we're resources to each other, where we're willing to like look at our neighbor instead of just passing by in the hall. And I think that is really the beautiful thing about Network of Neighbors, is how do we be there for our neighbors?
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. I had an experience today that like just I've been kind of what would you call it? Reflecting on how this is what I'm telling everybody else that they should do. So I have to be somebody who's going to do this as well, to kind of be prepared to assist somebody who's having challenges in their life in a non-judgmental way. Just, hey, Jane, I think you're experiencing violence in your life. I want to be a help to you to keep you safe if you want my help, you know, that kind of a thing. Right. And so I'm kind of like, how would I have these conversations? Right. So today I was at the post office, and this indigenous woman in a wheelchair, she yells out to me, and I will go and have a chat with her, and she wanted some money. And I was chatting with my friend, the chief of the police here. His name's Shaheen Madizadeh, and I had a chat with Shaheen about, gee, do you give money to indigenous people? Because I do, like, you know, all that. And he says, no, like he's a law enforcement expert. He says, definitely you should offer to support them with food, for sure, but not money. I said, okay. So today, that's what I did. I said, her name is River. And I said, River, I'm not going to give you any money, but I'll buy you lunch if you're hungry. And she said, yeah. And she told me her story, and it's just heartbreaking, right? Like, it's just, you know, she's indigenous, grew up on the reserve, started like when she was raped when she was a toddler, and raped, you know, whatever, 100 times since then, and was imprisoned and was drugged and raped while she was imprisoned. And it's just like, oh man. So, you know, when you start to hear those stories and think about how, you know, what kind of support, what kind of, you know, direction can we do here in this community, in our community, Lethbridge? We have this navigator training. It just started yesterday, and the navigator training is about understanding what resources are available. Now, in her case, she had a place to sleep. She had, you know, connections. She had things figured out, and she had a coffee and a meal and a chat with me, and that was a nice thing too. So that was good. But then they have like level 2 and level 3, who are the more like professional, trained, you know, that kind of a thing. So the idea is somebody like me at a base level, just basic needs, a resource to get her what she needs, kind of thing. Oh, you need a place to stay. Have you checked out this shelter? Do you know about this shelter? I know the director, the executive director at that shelter. I'll call for you, you know, that kind of a thing. Right. So I think it's just kind of meeting, not ignoring, I guess, is today it was very enlightening for me to have that conversation, right? And normally, what would I have done? I kind of would have looked the other way and kept walking. So I didn't today, because I'm trying to kind of, where I have to be more open to having conversations with people who are in different circumstances.
Absolutely. I think coming together as a community is a recognition that everybody in that community has a story. I have a slightly different perspective on the money piece.
Okay, let's hear.
As someone, so since 2018, I have focused almost exclusively on supporting women experiencing homelessness. And in my community, that experience comes with a lot of addiction pieces, and those pieces are driven by trauma. And so if somebody comes and they ask me for money, I'm assuming, and I'm assuming this because I respect that other individual as an individual, I'm assuming that they're asking for what they need, for whatever the resource is, right?
Okay.
Yeah. So if someone's coming, they're like, hey, I need money. You know, if I'm going to help them, my decision to help them isn't dependent on whether or not that person has an addiction or whether or not that person needs groceries. I can appreciate the police chief's perspective, especially from a law enforcement role. But as somebody who works in a community that is living with the effects not only of violence in their lives, but in the generations before them, I think it's really important that even when we're thinking about domestic violence, like one of the things we talk about in the Network of Neighbors training is if she says, hey, I need you to do this, it is our role to listen to that, not to judge her, not to decide that our goal for her is more important. So if she says, I don't want to leave right now, we talk about that, right? It's really important that we respect that. We don't push
Right.
people into
Right.
things they're not ready. So really, like, I think when we're thinking about allyship, going back to that piece where not only are we listening, but we're withholding our own set of values
Okay. So Rachel,
from
just
them.
can I just interject? 'Cause I think
Yeah.
here's what you're saying. You're saying that making your support conditional is kind of attaching a judgment to your support. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
You're saying, well, I'll give you money if you're going to use it for this purpose, but not for
hmm
this. Okay.
And
I see.
and people have those roles in their lives. I'm not saying like, oh, my sister, I'm not going to give her $20 for, but if my goal is to support my community, then what I need to assess is in that moment, and am I in a position to support that person, as opposed to that person's not doing it right. Like, that's never the judgment. The judgment's always, and we talk a lot about reflexivity, right? We're always reflecting back on ourselves. If today that $20 is conditional, then maybe I need to think about whether or not I'm in a position to be giving that at all, right? Maybe there's a different kind of thing that I would feel more comfortable with. There's a different way I can give to my community.
Yeah. Okay. I understand your point. I thank you for that.
Yeah, I enjoy talking with you,
Alan. Well, hey, we're both trying to change things for the better, right?
Yeah.
I got to say, you've probably got better plans than I do. So I just want to glob on to yours and follow them is my plan.
Oh, man. There's a lot going on over here.
Back to when I was mentioning about Shaheen there, Chief Mendizadeh, he was also talking. That's why you and I had the conversation about in a supportive way to address with somebody who's using violence, because he had referenced a program, and I believe he said it was in Manitoba, in which they had kind of an official or a more structured sort of a way to have conversations with somebody who are using violence. And we didn't get into all the details of how it worked, but it makes sense that that's part of it as well, to be able to at least offer support, at least offer, back to your thing about how violence comes about. My friend David Irvin has a quote, and I'm going to butcher it, but it's something like this, that violence is a result of suffering, which has found no other way to express itself, which makes sense, right?
Yeah.
You get violence. Some people get super empathetic, super caring, super compassionate, right? And want to give and protect people. And other people, it kind of works where violence is going to be the result of that suffering, right? And more men on the violence is what that suffering is going to result in. It seems like that's certainly the way that works as well. Would you agree?
I think the outlets for violence are just look different. I think the reality is that everybody lives with violence, and so what supports does that person have to get through that violent situation with the least amount of trauma possible? That's kind of where we're talking about, like, when we think about, when you stretch it way out, even to just looking at like secure attachments, like how much support does that person have, and how are we teaching them to use that support in a way that sets them up to be successful down the line when they're not experiencing violence, or when somebody else is trying to work with them through a situation in which maybe they perpetrated an act of violence. Like, I don't think anybody's innocent. But I also think that we are all just doing our best ultimately. So how do we set up people so that their best is less harmful to others?
Okay. See what you're saying. Did you say that everybody experiences violence? Is that what you said?
I believe that everybody experiences violence. I think it looks different for different people, right?
Really? I'm not so sure I'd agree with that. Like, you mean there's like, I don't know if I've experienced violence. I don't think I have.
I would encourage you to speak to a counselor. I feel very strongly that everybody does. And I also feel very strongly that everybody needs counseling. I think it's really important for us all to be really reflexive in, like, hey, like, that thing that happened, maybe it doesn't fit my traditional definition of violence. And I think that's maybe more where we see things differently. I think as somebody who's been working in this field for a significant portion of my career now, I see violence all around me. I see it in the way men interact with women online. I see it in the way people push past each other. I see it in the way people debrief difficult conversations. If someone says, fuck you, I've had enough, and they get up and they storm out, okay, that was
That's
a
violence.
choice. That was a choice, but what were the impacts it had on the other person? What did that other person pull away from that situation? Did they learn, I can't disclose that I've experienced violence now because now I have to worry about that person, and when those experiences build, that's violence in my belief.
Okay. I see
I
it.
wouldn't
Yeah.
say I'm an expert, but I think I have been watching a lot of people go through really tough situations for a long time to realize that violence isn't always one action. It's many, and they just layer. And so when we're working through that, we are working on ourselves and pulling those pieces apart. And so how do we do that in a way that is supportive and loving to ourselves, to our neighbors, to each other, to the recognition that we are always trying to do better?
By the way, counseling, I'm a big fan of counseling as well. If you have,
Excellent.
matter of fact, my day job is an employee benefit specialist. So I help companies set up, the tools to help their employees, their team members stay healthy, right?
Yeah.
Big advocate of employee family assistance plans. Use mine all the time and encourage everybody to use theirs. Even if you don't have a problem, even if you want to make life 1% better, go talk to somebody who's outside of your life experience and say, hey, this is how things are working. And they'll ask you some questions.
Yeah, exactly. Lean on each other as a community, as a resource. That's why those services are there. Gabor Mate said something in a training recently. He said, social workers at one point felt unwanted as children, and so they have made themselves invaluable as adults. And I really think it would be a wasted resource for us to not take advantage of these experts who have dedicated their lives. So I think it's really important to continue it. And we talk about this in Network of Neighbors, the power of reflexivity, of being able to look back at ourselves. And so we can do that in such a supportive way. I think counseling is a great thing for everybody.
I agree. I love Gabor Mate. He's amazing. Hey.
He's pretty cool.
Oh yeah. I've been watching, like, he was on the World Trauma Summit from Ireland. He was the speaker on that. And of course they had the big, who was the non-duality group, the group that had his big video out and all the videos that were related to that. I watched that all. Yeah. He's super, like, just the way he frames it. And even where he talks about experiencing trauma and where he can have a conversation with almost anybody, and there's some kind of trauma residual in their life, that they felt neglected, they felt unloved, they felt abandoned, they felt that their connection to their parent, they couldn't be who they were, their authenticity, they had to cover that, or their sexual orientation or whatever it was, they had to be somebody different to maintain the relationship, the connection relationship with their parent. That makes so much sense, right? Like, it's just like, oh yeah, I get that now. So yeah,
it's we are complex beings made of many experiences, and there are things that happen in generations before us that we still live with today. So how do we support each other, recognizing that every person is flawed, and every human is traumatized, and everybody is just showing up for the sake of showing up some days, right? I think it's so important.
Yeah. So Rachel, tell me, what do this is hard work that you do, like, socially or emotionally very, very challenging work. So what does Rachel do to stay at her best? What do you do?
So I have one day that I dedicate only to myself. And I don't mean that in a selfish way, but it is my day to do whatever I need to do for myself. And so if that's laundry, it's laundry. If it's going on an adventure with my friend, I'm off, right? But I think one of the things that makes that one day possible is by leaning on my community, leaning on my friends. I have folks that I've gotten to know through this work that I know I can call anytime. I have people in my life that I can reach out to, and really, like, putting intentional effort into building those connections, knowing that I need a support system just like everybody else, right? And so I think, to answer that question in a really short way, is I'm a part of a network, whether that's my personal network or my professional network or my social network. Just knowing I'm not alone makes it a lot easier, because I'm not. I work alongside hundreds of people who are doing incredibly brave work every day, who are listening to hard stories, who are putting other people's needs above their own, and recognizing that we're here together to do something bigger than just show up to work.
Yeah.
Makes a big difference in my life.
Yeah. Excellent. Excellent. Well, I'm a big fan of Networking Neighbors, as you
Thank
know,
you.
and I think that it's going to be a tool that is going to be transformative. Like, the more in your community, in my community, let's say we get 100 or 200 or 1,000, network of neighbors that are looking out for each other, that have enough comfort level in themselves that they know what they might be able to be of value to one of their fellow human beings, right? One of their brothers and sisters, to be able to say, here's what I think you might be experiencing, and I want to help if you wish my help, right? And not in an obtrusive, not in a judgy way. And then also the knowledge of what resources are available. I think we can dial violence way back. And what happens when we dial violence way back? What happens, Rachel?
We experience more joy because we're together in it. Right?
Yeah, we experience more joy, and everybody's safety goes up. Everybody's safety goes up. We're healthier. Our community is healthier. Our engagements are more positive, more productive, more life affirming, right? Like it changes everything.
Yeah. If we're able to work through violence when it happens, we come away with less trauma than if we aren't, right? And so really we're at this point where if we're able to provide that support right away, if we're able to be there for each other in that moment, that sense of togetherness. And when pandemic hit, suddenly you see these together signs everywhere, right? Like we're one group of people, we're fighting really hard to stay together through this. That's resilience. And that is something that makes people feel better. Statistically, not being alone, people do better. So how do we bring that into everything we do? And in this circumstance, how do we intervene in violence in our community, right? By being together in it.
Exactly. Because I started with obviously the adverse childhood experiences part, but going upstream further, it's the act of violence first, right? That violence could be, of course, witnessed by the child. That's an adverse childhood experience, right? And so just that by itself is, violence is really the part that if we can, and I'm sure we can dial that back. I'm sure we can help people stay safe, right? If they say, I need a place to stay because this is my reality, great. Like, here's the phone number I can call to get you a place to stay that you're going to be safe.
Or a phone number that maybe this person didn't have that they could call, right? Like
exactly.
Making sure that as allies, we're letting people lead the experience. We're supporting them through the process. We're empowering people by giving them tools. Yeah. It's 100. I'm the same way. Like when I first started in my role, I was constantly like, oh, let me help. And then I realized that what I should be saying is, what help do you want from me? Like, how can I support you in this? And so really kind of bringing that home, right? And I think it's a growing process. Everybody's in a different place. We're just all here together.
Yes. Rachel, I got to tell you, I think you've given me a source of reflection, personal reflection here. I said that I don't think I've experienced violence or used violence, but if it's yelling and cussing at somebody, then I've used violence, right?
You should see me driving to work some days. It's not pretty. I'm not saying nice things. I want you to stop turning left, but at the same time, I am also human. And so recognizing that, it's about how we respond, how we follow up, how we change things for the future,
Yes. Yeah.
Everyone's allowed to be frustrated. It's just about what responses are appropriate. Yes. And if someone comes to us and says, like, this is a thing going on in my life, it's about listening to them and not superimposing our judgment and being there to be there. And I think that with your spirit and I think a lot of the people who've come out to Network of Neighbors, like being really jazzed about it, my hope is that we can keep changing that tide and be there for our community as we move forward.
Yes. And you know what? You raised another good point that apparently I wasn't a very good student when you were teaching me a couple of weeks ago, but the part about, that they're directing what they need and you're there to support how they want you to support you, right? Not, okay, this is what I'm going to do for you. That makes really good sense.
It all comes from a really great spot. It's just, this is a part, our land acknowledgement. I love it because somebody spent so much intention. Jen wrote it, and one of the lines in it is, allyship is a continuous process, not a designation that is earned. Right. Yes. And I love that because it always, like, we are always learning how to do better because we might not have been listening before, or maybe something's changed, or, learning is about unlearning and being open to new suggestions. And so how do we do that in a way that we not only are supportive and loving to ourselves, but supportive and loving to others? And I think that is when we're talking about ways to change the social issue of violence, coming at each other from a place of love and pulling each other back in and staying connected is so important. And I'm not saying there's not going to be times you need to call the police. 100%. I don't want anybody to be in that situation of imminent harm and not have safety. But what I do think is important is recognizing that it isn't the police who are going to solve domestic violence, right? That's a community problem. So we as a community have to come together, and we have to be there for each other and be there, like you say in the beginning of this, we have to be there for the kids. We have to be there for the future. We have to be willing to change our patterns so that we can support them in doing new things.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said, Rachel. All right. So what did we just agreed? You're taking minutes, right, of this meeting? So we just agreed that Rachel will end violence by when? September 28th. Is that good enough? Can you get it done by that?
I mean, 13 days seems doable. Just start wearing more of these shirts.
Exactly. Anyways, Rachel, I'm a big fan of your program. I think now, this was your and Jen's brainstorm, the Network of Neighbors?
This was Jen's brain, baby.
Jen, look at her go, eh? Wow.
Jen has won awards for her community work. So I am very privileged to get to work and learn from her.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, I think you hit on a winner template. I want to be part of your winner template. I think you're going to make big changes with it. And so what is your idea, that you're going to export it all over the place afterward? And obviously you and Jen aren't going to go touring around the world doing this, I don't think, are you?
Not really COVID friendly. We both have really busy dockets. So our hope is to make Network of Neighbors into a thing that can continue to grow without us presently always being on a Zoom call every week, right? But still being available as resources, I think, is the important part. So for the short term, at least, that's what I foresee.
Yes. Well, I think it's awesome. And I think you're very good about talking about, here's the barriers you're gonna question whether you can be of any value, right? Well, you can. Yeah. Here's what you can do. You're gonna question whether you're gonna mess it up and make life worse. Well, you won't if you do these things, right? And don't push, as you said, don't push the person, especially if it's an exit plan, right? It's her. It's
always the person's decision. It's just a matter of how can I be helpful? Can I be helpful, first of all, because maybe I'm not somebody you want to share this with, and that's fine. But how can I be helpful? Would it be helpful if I loaned you my phone so you could call someone, right? Little, as small as sometimes just making eye contact with someone to let them know that you see them. I think Jen talks about that when we get into the interventions, is really just like, there are big ways to intervene, and then there are ways to follow up and let somebody know that you're there for them. And each is just as powerful.
Well, I think it was you or Jen that mentioned about somebody homeless on the street to make eye contact, say hi. They're a person, right? They're a person 100%. Who's having a really shitty time right now, right?
They're a part of your community.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
To be raised in a community that you can no longer afford to live in, that's so painful. Right. Yeah. And so really, when I'm thinking about how I want to be there for my community, you're right. Eye contact, coffee, listening to a story, doing what you can do. That's as much as you can do, really.
Yes. You, I think, had mentioned 3 different ways of intervention. I think you'd said in your course, right? So now I'm going to give you an example that I learned from my Australian friends, and then you tell me which 3 that it connects with. Are you ready?
Time. Yeah.
All right, here's the quiz time. There's this subway, and there's this woman on the subway sitting here, and there's a man on the subway sitting across from her, and he is leering at her. He is making her uncomfortable, right? There's a guy observing this exchange, right? He can see that she's uncomfortable. And first of all, the thought, it kind of gives his dialogue. And his dialogue is, well, he's just looking at her And then he looks back and, oh, but she's pretty uncomfortable, right? So his intervention, what does he decide to do? He takes a step forward. He blocks the line of sight between them. And he looks at the woman and gives her a little nod and looks at the guy and gives him a little sneer. And he just stays there, right? So what kind of intervention is that?
Oh dear. I think that's what is it? Distract?
I think so. I think that'd be a good one. Distract. Like, it's just like, I loved where it was, you have a conversation with the person who's being challenged, right? Who's being, and, I think that's a beautiful way. You just kind of ignore that somebody is angry over here, it seemed like, and just say, hey, Susie, how are you doing? I haven't seen you. Or can you help me with this? I'm trying to find the street over here or whatever. Right. So
I think another way to go about that would be to engage him. Be like, hey, how's your day going? Right?
Yeah.
Pull his attention off of her.
Right.
Maybe he needs someone to check in. Maybe it was having a shitty day. Maybe he wasn't thinking about it. Then if he blows you off, turn around and be like, hey, how's your day going? Right. And you can make people feel comfortable while reminding them of the tone of the interaction. Right. If somebody in that circumstance, if I was there and I was in between these two people, I might try to engage him first because she's already had a lot of attention on her.
Right.
Give her a break. Let her have some peace. If that doesn't work, then checking in and being like, hey, are you okay? Like, can I do something? That's helpful too. Yes. So I wouldn't be afraid. And I think Jen and I talked about this when we were talking about the scenarios. Personally, I'm someone who's maybe a little more direct, right? So being willing to engage that person, be like, hey, how's it going? I like your shoes, right? And try to pull the attention off of her.
Right. Yeah. Got it. Okay. Rachel, you got that diarized about ending violence, right? You got that marked down?
I gotta go so I can get started.
I can't keep you any. It's just about bedtime for you. You got to get to sleep so you're rested in the morning.
I am tired, so yeah, I'm gonna do that.
Rachel, it has been a pleasure talking to you. You and your work partner Jen are beautiful human beings. I think you're doing amazing work. I'm on yay, Team Rachel Jen. Woohoo! You're awesome.
It's a network of neighbors. It's bigger than us now. We've trained 100 people.
All right. Okay. Got it. Well, I am proud to say that I am indirectly, I'm the Alberta affiliate to the network of neighbors at this time.
We love it. We're really excited about that.
All right. Sounds good. And we're going to be chatting more because I'm hoping to have you and Jen do a little presentation for our community.
Yeah.
So I think that we're going to make that happen.
I'm excited about that. I think communities in different places deal with things differently. So I'm really looking forward to the participation of other people in your community and kind of seeing what comes out of that conversation, because I find they're always a little bit different.
Yeah, makes sense, right? Yeah. Do you have many Indigenous in your community?
We do have a pretty significant Indigenous population in my community. And I think I would say that people are starting to look at their ancestry a little bit differently now. Okay. And so I think every day I'm learning more about my community.
Yeah. I'm, I know that I am a person of privilege, and I've come to be made aware of that now. And I got to say, I was very insulted to be called a person of privilege. But when I do all the research, it's, oh yeah, I'm a person of privilege for sure.
Oh, right? For sure. And recognizing our social location is so important, especially when we're trying to help other people. You can't just rush in and assume you know better. You need to be able to reflect and examine the differences between you and them and how that plays out on your daily experience, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's just so many times it surprises you about when it becomes clear how differences are, right? Yeah. That it's kind of a shocking thing, but it exists, right? And I've gone blissfully along for my decades of time, not even thinking about it, that I had this huge advantage because of the color of the skin, right? Didn't even, and then when and how did I view Others, how did I view Indigenous people? Well, I was told that they were, lazy drunks, blah, 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 right? And then, but no, I didn't know anything about the whole colonization process. And that whole process, when it became clear, holy shit, for 150 years, we've been trying to kill these people and their culture, do this cultural genocide, and very like, poisoning, sharing diseases so they get, it's just like, oh man, it's amazing that us as Canadians could have done that. Like, I don't know. It blows me away.
I think the fact that Canada continues to do it
True
is just blowing my mind most days.
Yeah. You know what? I just learned this yesterday. I was on this Indigenous. She's a doctor in the University of Calgary, who's the head of the Indigenous health program there. Very, very knowledgeable woman. And if I understood her correctly, they have girls who are in foster homes who are being sexually abused, who are being raped, and they don't take them out of the home. They install they without the girl's permission, put in a UID.
An IUD.
IUD, not UID. I'm sorry. Yeah, that's an explosive device or something. I'm sorry. Yeah, IUD. So how screwed up is that? Just, well, we're going to let the abuse happen, but she's not going to get pregnant this way, at least.
I would argue that that's against their human rights.
I think
and I think for a country that has as much privilege as it has, they're really, we do take firm stances, like especially like the Feminist Shift agency partnership that's putting Network of Neighbors together, like, that's not okay, and it's never been okay.
Never.
But it's been kept, and taking it back to that isolation piece, it's been kept secret, right?
Yeah.
And why is that? Because it is more powerful. Abuse thrives in isolation, and we talk about that in Network of Neighbors. And it is our job as people who are wanting social change to break down that isolation, and that means being an ally to those women. That means being an ally to a community whose women are missing and murdered. It means listening and learning and being willing to reflect on ourselves and do better.
I was talking to this young Indigenous woman, and she was talking about her daughter who's 15 years old, and she won't let her daughter go to the mall by herself, right? And it's like, why? Well, because of them, the missing and murdered and what is the word? Human trafficked Indigenous people, right? It's huge, right? And that thought would have never occurred for me with my daughter going to the mall. I would have never, oh gee, honey, don't go to the mall because I'm afraid you're going to get abducted. But from her perspective, is it good to be cautious? Hell yeah, right?
It's so important to be willing to reflect on your social location and the privileges and oppressions that separate you. I'm grateful to hear that you say that that's something you've been working on. I think it's really important. I think it's something that everybody has to do on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, it's been a bit of a challenge for me, but I
would say the beginning's the roughest spot.
The beginning,
right?
Okay,
because we get defensive as human beings. We want to be successful. And how does being successful look if you're being told that you're only successful because of, the reality is that is something that's undeniable, right? But it's also something that we can work to change.
Yeah, I agree entirely. And the first time, as I mentioned, that I was told I was privileged, right? It was at this group called the Social Housing Equity Network, and they talked about privilege, and I'd look around the room and, oh, that's me they're talking about. And then it's like I was pissed about it because I wanted to, as you alluded to, well, no, I created whatever good things in my life, I created them. Well, I had a freaking super highway without obstacles in the way. It was easy for me, right, to do that. But if I had a different color skin and nobody would put me in a classroom and pay attention to me, or want to relate with me, or those kind of things, well, then my life would have been markedly worse, right? That's the reality.
Your life would have been absolutely different. I think when we're talking about violence, we can't skip the conversation about intersectionality, right?
Yes.
And so I think it's really important to just be aware and to be willing to be told things that we don't know. And so that defensiveness, one of the things that we do in our work is when I notice I'm getting defensive, I need to stop and unpack that. Why am I getting defensive? Right. And be willing to kind of sit in that discomfort. And so that is a part of my role as an ally, and it's a part of my desire as a person in a community that wants to do better.
Right. Yeah. Well said. Well said. Hey, did you and I ever talk about the man box before?
No, what is a man box?
Okay. I got to share this with you briefly, and then I know you got to wrap things up here.
I'm getting sleepy over here.
I understand. Okay. Man box is basically the social conditioning that men get from their peers in the community, from their parents, from the adults in their life, right? And men, and it was progressively harsher than it is today, but it's still crazy things that men are taught. Maybe not men, not a boy today, but a man of my age, as an example. What I was taught: women, implicitly maybe, but women are less than men somehow, right? They're somehow responsible for men's sexual satisfaction. That's, somehow that's part of the deal. The only, you got to be a man, you have to be strong. You can't cry. You can't show any other emotions other than anger. You can get mad. That's okay, but nothing else, right? You can't be caring, you can't be loving, can't be, you can't have these type of emotions, right? And you can never, ever ask for help, right? So that's kind of the man box, right? And that fixes if you try and move away from the man box. If you're more gender fluid, or you're not a cisgender male, well then, you're outside of the man box. You're going to be looked at, you're going to be judged, you're going to be bullied, perhaps, if you're not part of that. Even if you're not athletic, even if you're not a big strong guy or something, right? Then, you're so, that kind of a thing is the man box.
I mean, I think the title is curious. A box is often a term used to refer to women's sexual organs. So now it's a man's box.
Okay.
But I do understand what you're saying. There is a societal expectation of men, and when men start to deviate from that, they're viewed as less than, but they're still more powerful than women, unless their skin color is darker, or they're expressing themselves in ways that are socially associated with women, or they come out as a trans woman, right? Like, there is a hierarchy to our society, and we would be naive to not acknowledge it. If we don't acknowledge it, we can't change it, and we need to change it. It needed to change.
There's this group called A Call to Men, and they're the big man box guys, and it's actually led by women more than the guys. But basically, they look at it to go to the margins of the margins, which are the people who are marginalized out. They're in the marginalized box, then are the worst. Well, or the worst experience, and it's Black trans females.
Mm-hmm.
They live to usually about 32 years old, right? Because
the rates of murder on top of the suicide rate, the reality is that when people are willing to be themselves, they are giving us a gift.
Mm-hmm. I agree entirely.
And any sort of rejection of that gift not only makes you a horrible human in my mind, but also the reality is that we are then discouraging people being themselves. So it starts with loving everybody and just being grateful that they are willing to show you who they are. And then asking, how can I support you?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Acknowledging maybe if it's difficult for you in that moment, but it's not about you. It's never been about you. It's always about the person that's taking that big step, because somebody coming to us and sharing that requires bravery, so much bravery. We have to be willing to give them the same courage they're giving us in that moment. And that means being willing to step over ourselves in the process and just thinking about them, right? And even when we're talking, again, I keep bringing it back to network of neighbors, but the reality is it's not about us. It's always about the person we're trying to support, because the more we focus on us, the more we do our things, the less we take away the isolation, and the more we build it up. So we want to be deconstructing the isolation that we've created in our communities as a way to respond to violence.
Agreed. We need more connection. with our community. We need more connection with ourselves actually as well, right? We need to be connected and be able to manage self-optimize ourselves, right? I think that's where the connection to ourself comes in. Rachel, that was beautifully said. That caffeine kicked in just at the right instant, and you put all those thoughts together so nicely. Very well, very well done. Thank you. And okay, and I'm going to leave you to your evening, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Alan. Have a great night. Thanks for this opportunity.
You bet.